Good morning and welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum. My name is Matt Courtney. I'm recorder and board member of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, I invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you've not already joined. Membership forms are available on our website at humanist.org. That's humanist plural.org. If you're listening for the first time, we welcome and we invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events you can find listed on the website, again, at humanist.org. Please feel free to contribute to aid us in continuing to present these forums. You can donate to our organization, again, on the website, humanist.org. Okay, our speaker today is Megan Schnabel. I hope I pronounced her last name properly, of the YWCA. I want to let her introduce herself more than the text that I have. It's not great for an introduction. So, Megan, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew. Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Schnabel. You did pronounce it right. Don't worry. And I am the Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator at YWCA Silicon Valley. We are located in downtown San Jose, and we provide services to a variety of folks in the community, and I'll talk more about that later. But I've been working at the YWCA for almost a year and a half, almost 2 years now, and I really love the work that I'm doing, and I'm excited to talk to you all today, and hopefully we have some interesting conversation. But if I can go ahead and get started now, does that sound good? Cool. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about a brief introduction to the YWCA, the services that we offer, and sexual assault, and what that is and how that affects our community and what we can do to help. That being said, we're going to be talking about some potentially heavy, some potentially triggering topics that might bring up some feelings or, some uncomfortableness, and that's okay. Right? Talking about this stuff is really important, but it's also really challenging sometimes. So I want to acknowledge that and give you guys the space to take care of yourselves if you need to. If you need to get up, go to the bathroom, go get a drink of water, I will not be offended. Please do whatever you need to do. Okay. So for those of you that are unaware, the YWCA has been around for a very long time. We were previously known as the Young Women's Christian Association, but we have since, we no longer go by that name. We just go by the YWCA because we serve all kinds of folks, not just people who are Christian and not just people who are women. But in 1973, a really, really big change was made. We established the 24-hour rape crisis line. It was actually the first in Santa Clara County and the second in California. And this, the purpose of this was to provide resources and information to survivors of sexual assault. This include, how to receive treatment, how to receive medical care, and potentially accompanying clients to police interviews, the hospital, and all of these different things that would happen during the case, right? So that started in 1973. And before I jump into, what the YWCA is doing now, I wanted to do a brief introduction as to what sexual assault is, because for those of us that don't know, it's a huge issue in our community, and it's something that we are working to combat on a daily basis at the YWCA. So what is sexual assault? Sexual assault is an umbrella term. It covers a variety of sexual acts, contact, or behavior that occurs without consent. And a lot of people, when they think of sexual assault, they automatically think of words like rape, right, or date rape and things like that. And that is definitely a form of sexual assault, but there's also other forms of assault that may not necessarily involve penetration specifically, but can still be considered assault because it does not involve consent, right? What a lot of people don't realize about sexual assault is that it's not about sex in itself. It's more about power and control. It's asserting yourself over somebody else and saying, I have power and control over you, and I'm going to use sex and trust as a tool to promote violence and harm you in some way. And it's a very unfortunate thing, right? But consent, for those of you that don't know, that's the key here, right? Anything that happens without consent could be considered assault. And what consent is an ongoing, willful, active, and enthusiastic yes, right? It's giving permission. If I'm asking for consent, then I'm asking for permission. If I'm giving consent, then I'm giving permission. This contributes to a variety of things, but it's really important in terms of sexual activity and relationships, right? And these little bullet points are some check boxes, I'd say, in terms of getting consent from somebody. So someone has to have the actual mental capacity to say yes. If someone has a developmental disability or traumatic brain injury, or there's something going on that prevents them from fully understanding what's happening, then they're not actually able to say yes. If someone is intoxicated, unconscious, or sleeping, then they're not able to say yes, and they cannot legally give consent. And the same with people who are under the age of 18. In California, the legal age of consent is 18 years old, and anybody under that age cannot legally consent to sex. And this isn't to say that, the police are going around looking for teenagers that are having, safe, consensual sex with their boyfriend or girlfriend or partner, but this is to protect folks who are under 18 who may be taken advantage of by older adults, right? When we talk about power and control, someone who is older than you, someone who's an adult, has a lot of power and control over you when you're a young child. So this law is in place to protect children who may be taken advantage of. The legal definition is very wordy. I like the enthusiastic yes a lot more. But if you're interested, this is the legal definition: positive cooperation in act or attitude pursuant to an exercise of free will, which means I have the free choice to say yes or no, depending on what I want. You can act freely and voluntarily, and previous dating or marital relationship shall not be sufficient to constitute consent. What this means is that if someone is in a relationship, if someone is married, that does not mean that they are automatically consenting to sex every single time, right? I think we all know this, but it's important to point that out, especially in terms of the legality of consent and all of that, because there's a lot of situations where someone may claim that, they did not commit an assault because they are married to this person, when we know that's not true. Someone can still be harmed even if they are married or in a relationship with someone. Some important statistics to know about sexual assault. 1 in 3 women in their lifetime are sexually assaulted. 1 in 6 men in their lifetime. And 85% of the time, the perpetrator is actually somebody that they know. So there's a myth that goes around that, someone who sexually assaults somebody is a scary, mentally unstable person that hides in the dark alley with a big cloak on, and they jump out and attack strangers, right? That's a myth that's harmful, because in a lot of situations, when that trust is broken and, someone's barriers are violated, it's often done by someone who actually knows them. And a lot of people are not aware of this. And it's a huge factor that comes into play when someone has experienced sexual assault and is trying to heal from that. In colleges, 20 to 25% of women are sexually assaulted compared to 7% of men. Oh, sorry. And, if we look further at the college demographic specifically, there's a lot of work being done to prevent sexual assault on college campuses. There's a lot of awareness campaigns that happen on college campuses. And there was a study done to talk about consent and to see, how much of an understanding students had of what consent is. And they found that only 18% of college students, 18% of college students believed that as long as the person didn't say no, they had consent, right? They weren't aware of what we call affirmative consent, the idea that yes means yes instead of, no means no, right? It's the idea that someone has to actually say yes to consent to something instead of being silent or not putting up a fight or something like that, right? So only 18% of college students are aware of this. 22% of college students believed that, one act like kissing or touching somebody meant that that person was consenting to further sexual activity. And that number jumps up to 47% when that initial activity is something more explicit, like taking your clothes off. And this is harmful because consent is revocable at any time. Hopefully a lot of us know this, but if we're in the middle of something and we decide we don't want to do it anymore, that's totally okay. That person should respect our right to choose and to take back our consent, right? But a lot of college students aren't aware of this. And 35% of survivors were unclear it was a crime or that harm was intended. And there's a lot of reasons that this might be. One of the biggest ones being that people aren't always aware of what is considered sexual assault, right? People aren't always aware that what happened to them, is not okay, right? They might think that, oh, it's fine because they were my boyfriend, or they might blame themselves and say, I went to that party and I drank a lot, so, I just made a silly mistake or something. When in reality, they were taken advantage of and they were harmed. And just the fact that they might not know the legal definition of consent, they might not know the statistics around sexual assault, that doesn't mean that there wasn't harm done. Okay. Oh, and the other one I wanted to mention, LGBTQ people are at a higher risk, especially trans and bisexual folks. And this is for a variety of reasons, the main one being there is a lot of discrimination and over-sexualization of the LGBT community. And because of that, there's the assumption that, violence against them is more acceptable when it's not, right? So these are some common responses that someone might have if they experience sexual assault. Now, this is not an all-encompassing list. This is not a checklist that somebody has to mark off all the boxes. It's simply, some examples of what might happen. Right? Muscle tension, changes in sleeping and eating patterns. These are physical responses to an assault. Anxiety, denial, guilt or self-blame. These are emotional responses, right? Everybody responds differently to a traumatic experience, whether it be a car accident or sexual assault. All of the responses that our body and our mind has to a traumatic experience is normal because we're reacting to an abnormal amount of stress and our body is finding whatever ways it can to cope with that. Okay, so you might see some of these in someone who's a survivor of sexual assault. You might not see any of these in someone who's a survivor, and that's okay because everybody's different. So there are a lot of challenges to labeling sexual assault. I kind of talked about this a little bit, but sometimes survivors don't actually label the incident as sexual assault or report it as a crime. This happens more often when they know the perpetrator, which we saw is a very common occurrence. If I know that person, if I had an ongoing relationship with them, I might feel less comfortable reporting it, right? I might feel less comfortable talking about it to somebody. If they don't fit the stereotypical assault, right? If there wasn't a weapon used, if there wasn't physical force, then they might not consider it sexual assault, right? If alcohol and drugs are involved, if there's no sign of physical injury, those are other barriers, right? Maybe they don't remember everything. Maybe there's a stigma around, drinking and partying and sex. I think there is in our culture, unfortunately. And the final one being, if a survivor identifies as a man, in the statistics we saw earlier, it's a very low percentage of male identifying survivors. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen to men. It definitely does. We have male survivors that we support at the YWCA. But because of toxic masculinity, because of the culture that we live in, a lot of men don't feel comfortable disclosing this, or they might not recognize that what they experienced was assault. So that's another barrier. A lot of these folks who've experienced sexual assault, if they do decide to go and report this to the police and make a criminal case, a lot of these might come up. And even if they don't decide to report, they might still experience these things. So like feelings of blame or guilt. Victim blaming is the idea, well, you shouldn't have been wearing that dress. You shouldn't have been walking home alone at night, right? Things like that. You shouldn't have gone out and partied by yourself, right? These are victim blaming statements, right? That takes away the accountability from the person who caused the harm and putting it on the person who experienced the assault. Sometimes they might be scared of retaliation. They might not know where to go or what resources are available. Or maybe they've had previous negative experiences with law enforcement, so they don't have that trust in the system, right? There's also cultural issues, right? Different cultures might have different understandings about sexual assault and relationships, and that could be a barrier in receiving the support that someone might need. And again, the closer the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim, the greater the likelihood of not reporting. If this is someone that I am friends with or in a relationship with or living with, then reporting it might cause more harm than good, right? Here's a quote from a survivor and the founder of Mirror Memoirs. They're a nonprofit support organization for survivors of sexual assault. But the quote says, "In order for survivors to report their assault to authorities, we have to trust the state, strangers in the form of police, social workers, judges, and prosecutors, more than we fear our perpetrators, people who violated our trust." That's very difficult to achieve. And the point being made here is that when someone experiences assault, when someone experiences something traumatic like that, their world is shaken up, right? They now have to reevaluate who they can trust, reevaluate what's safe and what's not safe. And in order to, persecute the person, get criminal charges, and even just healing in general, they have to put their trust in more strangers, right? In social workers, judges, law enforcement. And that can be really difficult, especially if the people that they're working with aren't familiar with the, they're not trauma informed, they're not survivor centered. All of these things are really important when ensuring somebody's healing process. So, all of that being said, back in 1973, we started the 24-hour crisis line. The YWCA Silicon Valley today, we are a much larger organization now. We are serving all across Santa Clara County, and we're providing a lot more than just a 24-hour hotline. So if you aren't already aware, the YWCA's mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all, right? And our main focus, the way that we do this, is by supporting survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking. I talked a lot about sexual assault. Maybe I'll come back another time to talk about domestic violence and human trafficking, but those are our focuses. And we're located, again, in downtown San Jose. We have a couple of satellite offices in Sunnyvale because we are expanding to the North County, and we're making sure that everybody up there can also receive our services. And aside from the 24-hour hotline, we have a continuum of services that is, hopefully going to address a lot of the barriers that survivors of assault and violence face in their community and when they were trying to receive support. So in addition to the 24-hour hotline, we have crisis response and counseling. So not only can you call us 24/7, you can also receive an in-person advocate if you ever go to the hospital for a medical exam, if you ever go to a law enforcement agency to report the crime or have an interview or anything like that. And we also offer counseling and therapy and support groups for those who might need it, right? Depending on your level of need, you might need just 1 or 2 sessions, you might need a long-term therapy. Whatever it is, we can help provide that. We also provide emergency shelter and a rapid rehousing program for folks who may have just experienced an assault and don't have anywhere safe to go. For folks who are actively fleeing an abusive partner or domestic violence, they have the option of an emergency shelter, which is a huge, huge resource. And unfortunately, the need is very high in Santa Clara County and across California. Our rapid rehousing program works specifically with the county to help connect survivors to low-income housing or assistance with rent and things like that. Under advocacy, we have case management. So if you've experienced an assault and now you've decided, I want to pursue this, I want to go to criminal court, we assign you a case manager to help you through all that, right? Because it's a very gruesome process. Many survivors often experience re-traumatization by talking about their story over and over again, or having to be interviewed by police officers and people who may seem intimidating, frankly. Having a case manager, having an advocate with you can make a huge difference in that. because there's someone that you know is going to be there to support you, answer your questions, hold your hand literally and figuratively throughout the process. We also have legal services. They focus specifically on domestic violence, and they also support folks who may have issues with immigration or child custody, divorce, restraining orders. All of those things our legal service department can help you with. And then finally, we get to personally my favorite part of the YWCA is our education and outreach department. That's the department that I work in. Previously, I had been working in crisis response, which is very fulfilling but very hard work. Education and outreach is an amazing program. We go all across Santa Clara County. We talk to kids as young as kindergarten to adults in the community, and we teach them about how to support a survivor, how to talk about your boundaries and consent, and we talk about awareness, just like this, right? So that's a really great program, and I think prevention is one of the biggest keys in, ending violence in our community, because intervention is huge. Making sure that survivors have the resources that they need to heal is huge, but prevention is the other half of it, right? If we're not doing prevention work, then, we're not going to make as much of a change as we might want to see. We also have curated pathways and tech girls. Those are specific programs that help youth get involved in STEM. And then we also have childcare. We provide free to low-cost childcare for members in Santa Clara County. Now, as we're all aware, there is a new barrier currently happening for everybody in our communities, but also survivors. So COVID-19 and Santa Clara County Shelter in Place has created a unique set of circumstances for both service providers and survivors of violence. YWCA is an essential service. We provide essential safety net services to survivors of violence and their families. So we are still running. We're still trying to provide those services to folks. We're just adapting and trying to be flexible in how we are providing these services. For example, our advocates that normally attend interviews in the hospital in person, they're now working with the hospital to be able to do it over Zoom and video chat and things like that. Our 24-hour hotline is still open. Everyone is still able to call it. We also have an online platform called Safe Chat Silicon Valley, and that's a texting platform that people can use to talk to an advocate. We're also very aware that safe at home is not necessarily safe for everyone. There are folks who may be stuck in a situation where now they have to stay inside with their abuser, and that's a really difficult situation to navigate. So we're addressing that need, and we're reaching out to folks who might need our support. So what can you do? With everything going on, there's not as much involvement as people might want to have because we're all stuck at home, but there are still things that you can do. If you know someone who may have experienced violence either previously or recently, there's some things that you can do and some things that you should avoid. Actively listen, believe them, acknowledge and validate their feelings. So we're not sitting there and thinking, when Betty stops telling me the story, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go make a sandwich. No, we're actually listening to what she's saying. We're validating her experience. But we're not acting shocked, right? Hearing something like that can be very shocking, right? There's this thing called secondary trauma and compassion fatigue. And that happens when we hear someone's experience that might have been traumatic, and then we take that on emotionally. That can be really hard to navigate, but it's really important to take care of yourself, take a moment to breathe, and remember that in this moment, someone is coming to you for support. Someone is coming to you from a place of vulnerability, and you might be the first person they've ever told. You might be the only person they feel comfortable telling right now. So when that happens, it's really important to help them look for resources, help them find outside services, because you might not be a professional. You might not be able to provide the support that the YWCA might be able to offer. So you can connect them with resources in their community and empower them with the information and the tools that they need to promote their own healing. The YWCA is all about empowering individuals. So it's really important that when we give them all this information, we allow them to make their own choices. And that might be difficult because it's somebody that we love and somebody that we want to be okay. But, maybe they're not ready to break up with that boyfriend. Maybe they're not ready to move out of that house. Maybe they're not ready to report it to the police, and that's okay. We have to respect their decision and support them in whatever way we can and whatever way they need. On average, it takes someone 7 times to leave an abusive relationship. So if you're talking to your friend and they're not ready to leave, maybe they're just not on their 7th time yet. And that can be really difficult to sort of swallow as a friend and somebody who wants to help. But there are certain situations where we might not know everything that's going on, and that person ultimately needs to make the decision for themselves in order to heal. Some other things to avoid: try not to ask why questions. Actively listening, asking questions is part of it. But if we're asking, well, why did you go with him to that party in the first place? Or, well, why didn't you tell me sooner? Or why haven't you told your parents? Those are some examples. But asking them additional questions or asking them for, excessive detail can be re-traumatizing. Maybe they're not ready to talk about it. They've probably told you everything that they're already comfortable telling you. And that's okay. Maybe over time they'll come up and they'll share more with you. Maybe they won't. But that's up to them ultimately. There's 2 that I want to address. Confronting your abuser, or confronting their abuser rather, is a tricky situation. I do not recommend this because it could potentially make the situation more dangerous for your friend or the survivor, right? Especially in situations of domestic violence. In situations of sexual assault, it might be a case-by-case situation. Maybe they don't know that person, maybe they're not going to interact with them. But especially in situations of domestic violence where the person is interacting or maybe living with their abuser, confronting them could cause more harm than good, right? Because they might not retaliate on you. They might not even address what you said, but they might retaliate and further harm their partner or your friend, right? And finally, don't tell other people their story without permission. This is different than, maybe making a mandated report if you know about a child who's being harmed, right? That's something that we are obligated and responsible to do to ensure the child's safety. But if you have a friend who told you about this thing that happened, you're not gonna go to lunch the next day and say, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? They got sexually assaulted last week, right? That's not something that you're gonna share. For those of you that don't know, survivors have the option of reporting, but they also have plenty of options if they decide not to report. If they do report, they can go to law enforcement. Sorry, technical difficulties. There we go. They make an initial report to law enforcement. They can either go to whichever police station is in their city, or they can call the YWCA and we can help them make that report. They also have the option of going to Valley Medical Center. That's one of the hospitals in San Jose that provides sexual assault forensic exams. And that collects evidence for a case against someone who has committed sexual assault, right? It's important that they go between 72 and 96 hours in order for that physical evidence to remain there. Obviously, those are not mandatory for folks to do. If they don't feel comfortable doing that, that's okay. They have other options, right? They can reach out to their friends and family and get support that way. They can go to Planned Parenthood or whoever their medical care provider is and say, hey, I had rough, unprotected sex and I would like to be medically checked out. The reason that we give them this wording is because Planned Parenthood, doctors, other medical professionals are mandated reporters. So if someone comes to them and says that they've been sexually assaulted, they have to call the police. This is difficult for folks who don't want the police involved yet. So this is an option for them to get that medical care that they need without the pressures of having law enforcement involved. Another option is therapy and services. You can receive therapy without reporting to the police. That's totally okay. There are some, questions about whether or not the therapist is a mandated reporter, and that's something that's kind of a case-by-case basis, but that's something that they can receive to support them. This is important for survivors and also yourself. If you are trying to support somebody who's experienced violence of any kind, it can be a lot to take on emotionally, right? I mentioned compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. These are things that we experience when we hear somebody else's story, and that can prevent us from providing the support that we want to provide. So it's important to remember self-care. Take care of yourself both in the moment that someone is talking to you about this and throughout your time that you're supporting somebody. Don't try to rescue and fix them. Again, this is about empowerment. This is about ensuring that people can lift themselves up and heal after a traumatic experience. If we're swooping in and rescuing them and fixing them and saying, I will take care of everything, you don't have to worry, everything's going to be okay. If we're making promises to do all of this stuff for them, that's usually out of our control. So they're not necessarily true promises, right? And also, we don't want them to have to rely on us forever in this situation. We want them to feel empowered enough to move on their own. Attend to your own physical and emotional needs. When I was counseling, I realized that I hold a lot of tension in my jaw. And after every counseling session, my jaw would just be so tense. And, emotionally, I was drained, obviously. But it's important to notice that. Notice how your body responds to these things so you can attend to it as needed. And also, ask for help. Again, you guys aren't professionals. You aren't expected to provide an extensive amount of support to somebody, but you can give them resources. Give them our 24-hour support line. Offer to sit there on the phone with them while they talk to an advocate, or give them other links and information that they might find helpful. To close out, I just wanted to give you guys some action items on how to make our community safer. First and foremost, believe, support, and listen to survivors of violence. Everybody has a different experience and a different story. So if someone is brave enough to come to you and share that, make sure you give them that space. Speak up if you hear oppressive or hurtful comments, right? I talked a little bit about victim blaming, and there's a lot of language and culture in our society that in a way promotes violence and prevents folks who do commit violence from being held accountable. So when you hear those comments, when you hear those jokes, call them out, right? Share resources, articles, and blogs. Intervene safely to de-escalate potentially harmful situations. This is something that we call being an active bystander. And when you're an active bystander and you see something happening, you might say something or call somebody else for help or something like that. Contact your local legislators. Create policies at your school or workplace or in your community. And volunteer. You can volunteer at the YWCA if you're interested, or you could just learn more. That's the biggest thing. Learning about the issues related to violence, learning about sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, all of these things is a huge step in the right direction. Making yourself aware, that way you can make others aware and support someone who might need it. Again, our 24-hour support line, 1-800-572-2782. And then we also have a lot of national hotlines if anybody needs those. And that's about it. Here's our website, phone number, and thank you.
Thank you. Megan, do we have any questions? Go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll call on you here. Sometimes it takes a couple seconds. Maybe.
You can also type it in the chat box if you don't want to talk. That's cool too.
Yeah. I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet. Oh, there we go. Somebody raised their hand. Dick Hewitson. Yeah.
This isn't directly, that's why I didn't raise my hand, on the sexual assault. But I'm having a very difficult time dealing with my own feminism, of which I am very proud. But it seems to me that all the things that I learned from the feminist movement 50 years ago have gone down the drain. And I find myself just feeling awkward in a lot of situations. And one example is the most obvious example is that I learned a long time ago never to call a woman a girl or never to call a woman a lady. And those words seem to have come back into our regular conversation. And I feel kind of like, I don't know if I'm stuck in the past or what, but it's something that's been bothering me a lot. And I thought you were a person I could ask that.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you bringing that up. Although I can't speak for the feminist movement 50 years ago, I can say that there has been a lot of changes in language, and I think there always will be. And, you know, words like girl and lady, I could see how they might be considered offensive to some folks, but I think in a lot of situations, we, at least I can speak for the women that I work with and the women that I know, but words like girl and lady and things like that, we're trying to make sure that they're not seen as negative, right? So if we're using them and embracing them, then we're taking them back. It's another example in the LGBT community, the word queer is often, there's a lot of talk about whether or not that word is offensive. And a lot of people in the community are using that word to identify with and sort of take it back and say, it's not a negative word, it's my word. And I think that's kind of a similar vein there. And the same with victims and survivors, right? They might be a victim of violence, but at the YWCA, we refer to them as survivors to empower them, right?
Sure.
Okay, I have David.
Yeah, a couple things. One, I just wanted to mention to Dick that a lot of times these things are going to be contextual. And so it's going to matter a lot who's saying it, what the setting they're saying it is, who they're saying it to, and to the extent that we can determine someone's intent, like what they intend to do. Like I'm a gay person, and if I refer to myself as part of the queer community, that's a lot different than someone running, you know, if I'm like holding some guy's hand yelling queer at me out of a car. So it's like all going to be very, very contextual. And so some women don't want to be called a girl because they feel it's infantilizing, and some women, like I'm going out with the girls. These are just two completely different scenarios, and so it's really important that we kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture when we examine language. But I have a question from the Twitch chat for you, Megan.
Yeah, totally.
One of our regulars, Servants, was just asking, you know, if you could give us some examples of mandatory reporting organizations or mandatory people who are required to report.
Yeah, totally. First off, thank you, David, for elaborating on that. I thought that was wonderful. And then as far as the question about mandated reporting, teachers, doctors, and most often nonprofit advocates, anybody who works with youth or elderly folk would be considered a mandated reporter. Mandated reporting occurs when a child or someone who is not able to take care of themselves, like maybe somebody with a developmental disability or an elderly person who has additional needs, might not be able to take care of themselves, right? Those are situations, if one of those people is being harmed by somebody else, then that's when a mandated report is triggered, right? Somebody who is in that position of power to report it and take care of that person is responsible to make sure that that person is safe, right? So if they are aware that abuse is going on, then they are required to report. When I work with children, I'm required to report if if a child tells me that they're being abused. Same with a doctor or a teacher.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex and Senna.
Yes, I noticed that some people have physically raised their hand. They don't realize that you have to push the little button that says raise hand on the bottom of the white sidebar.
Well, as long as we're here, I had a couple of times. You said you could volunteer at Target. I gather there's not much you can do at this time, volunteering in place of it, where you would have to wait for the restrictions to be lifted. Is that correct? There are other things we do from home.
Yeah, so a lot of the places that provide services are now working from home. So volunteering is a little bit different. I can't speak for other organizations, but the YWCA is still taking volunteers. We have found a lot of different ways for folks to volunteer from home and still, support us and our mission. And if you're interested in that, we actually have a training on the 22nd. That's on Wednesday, for folks who are interested in volunteering from home. And if you want more information about that, you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat.
All right. The other thing I just wanted to comment that from what I've experienced, people I've spoken to over the years, I was surprised at how common it seems to be that women are abused by step-parents, by stepfather usually. It's just that as I got older and started talking to people about this, it seems to be quite common. That's it.
Yeah, it definitely is way more common than people realize. And it can be really shocking to realize that, so many people have been affected in one way or another by it. But I think that's why it's so important that this work is done and people talk about it. Because if people, you might know that it's going on, but you don't know how to help. And, again, that prevention is huge.
Yeah, and it's the same problem I suppose the police have, in that you don't know the person's, unless you know a lot about the person's situation, you're not sure what good advice would be. It's going to affect family, it's going to affect possibly the relationship of whether that's the abuse or not.
Okay. Scott, you've already unmuted yourself, apparently.
I'll mute myself again.
Well, then I can't unmute you. Just go ahead, Scott.
Trying to follow the rules. Megan, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate your coming in on a Sunday morning to talk with us. I really want to take your suggestions to heart. Things to avoid, for example, to act shocked. I think I can handle that. Not to ask why questions. I think I can handle that. There's one thing you've asked me to do that I have trouble with, and I wonder if you can help me, and that is you say that I should believe. If there's more you can say about that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of points that I want to make. One, if someone is coming to you and telling you this, it's a very difficult thing to talk about, one, and it can be very hard to come forward and, acknowledge that internally as well as vocalize it to somebody else. So the likelihood that somebody is lying about it is very small. And if we look at the rates of false reporting for sexual assault, they're like roughly 2 to 4%, and they're about the same as other violent crimes. So people are not, excessively lying about these kinds of things. And I can see where, if you're not quite sure the details or maybe the story doesn't make sense, that could be difficult to believe somebody. And especially if it's somebody that you know and the person who caused the harm is also somebody that you know, that's a lot to internally process. And that can be hard to believe right away, right? So I think in situations where you might internally have issues believing them, I would say don't vocalize that, and sort of just say, I appreciate you sharing all of this with me. Is there somebody else that you could talk to and get support from? Because to make sure that you have enough support. And then if, there's still internal issues that you're having, that would have to be internal work there, I think, depending on the situation for sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Megan, I don't see any hands at the moment, but can you end the screen share that helps us
yes.
display online better? But other than that, yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Need to put their hand up. Yes, we have Blair. Blair, you are unmuted.
Hi, I had a question. Do you have a phone number that I can call or a email address for counseling services? I'd like to attend maybe like group therapy counseling sessions. Do you have an address or phone number I could call?
Yes, absolutely. Our 24-hour hotline is the best number to call when you have questions about services. And I just put it in the chat, but it's 1-800-572-2782.
2782. Okay. Thanks for the meeting today.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And also with the support groups, I know considering the current shelter-in-place situation, our support groups are not meeting, but we have online support groups that we're currently in the process of getting together, and there's information about that on our website. Just so everyone's aware.
Anybody else have questions? There's a lot of people in the chat. Or on the Zoom meeting, I should say. Oh, there we go. Alex and Senna, again, I can't unmute you because you muted yourself. So can you, there we go.
Okay, yeah, I've heard someone comment on the radio a week or two ago, and there's especially concern about child abuse, because that's the sort of thing that's generally picked up in schools and so on. Are there any special activities involved there? If there's suspicions, do you actually go to a person's home? Or if there's suspicion of child abuse, or if there's a history of child abuse, is there any follow-up on that?
So I know that there is an increased risk of child abuse and domestic violence right now because of the shelter in place, and because the schools are closed, a lot of children are not around people who are mandated reporters anymore. So there is an increased risk. There is a concern about that. And I know that our agency is working on making sure that folks are able to reach us whenever they need. We are making sure to spread awareness to people who want to support us. Because yeah, if there's a red flag, if you see somebody who might be being treated poorly, if you're getting a gut feeling that something's not right, it's better safe than sorry to call either us or the Department of Family and Children's Services also has a line that you can call and say, hey, I'm not really sure about this, but it's making me feel a little bit weird, and I wanted to know if you guys thought that this was okay. There's lots of different resources that you can call if you're unsure.
All right, thank you. I was also going to comment, my feeling is in the past year so that entertainment, and especially music performances, have become a lot more sexualized. Are you concerned about that? Or, I find it entertaining, but at the same time, it just...
Yeah, so there's... we do a lot of... one of the many things that we do in our education is talking about media and how television and music and all of this stuff perpetuates what is essentially rape culture, and how that that over-sexualization of people, the objectification of people can promote violence unintentionally, and how our consumption of that media, it's really important that we do that with a grain of salt, right? And we kind of analyze the things that we're consuming and saying, is this reality? Is this, the media trying to send us a different message? So we do talk about that in a lot of our education, especially with youth, because, they're very vulnerable to all of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, David. Go for it. Dave, you're muted yourself, it looks like.
Well, on a mixer anyway.
Yeah.
Not via Zoom. Too many buttons and knobs here. On what Alex was saying about kids and media, I think like I remember a couple weeks ago, people were saying, oh, your Twitch channel says it's for mature audiences. And for example, I don't want kids watching my Twitch channel. And so I think it's really important with kids, or even people just young, we may call them young adults, teenagers or whatever, to sort of like for some entertainment is for adults and needs to be viewed by adults because adults understand, they know the context, they know that this is fantasy, this is not real, and that like there's nothing wrong with sexual displays in art and music. In fact, that's most of our great art and music is sexual or sensual displays of some kind, if you ask me. And so I think it's just real important to kind of understand when content is for adults, and if children are exposed to it, maybe a responsible adult can explain to a child or whatever why that is content for adults, and to just kind of draw a line there, because I think that we could go if we end up going the other way on that, if we end up going too far in the, oh well, this is over sexualized content, then we end up censoring some great art. And I think that people with the emotional and mental resources to process things like that and to understand what's going on there, and understand that it's fantasy or that it's meant to make a point and that it's not glorifying the violence, because in most cases the intent is not to glorify sexual violence in our media. But I think it takes an adult to process that stuff correctly. So I think it's kind of important for parents to just keep an eye on what their kids are looking at.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David, for bringing that up. And it's definitely, walking that line of making sure that, things are not harmful or, violence promoting or anything like that, but still empowering and, sex positive and all of that stuff, because bringing shame to sexual things and things like that further perpetuates, the harm that's being done in our community. And it can prevent folks from getting the support that they need if they feel that shame.
Okay, Alex and Senna again.
Yes, I wanted to remind people that there is a way to put the control of the TV on so that it will not it can differentiate, so that it can close things off so that a child can't see that particular station or whatever. So they should use that button.
Looks like we're out of questions for the moment. So I'm just going to go ahead and allow everybody to unmute themselves, and we can do kind of like a open forum kind of discussion. So everybody, you should be able to unmute yourself if you want to make comments and join an open discussion. Go for it.
I personally, I enjoyed the talk, and you answered so many questions I had, and probably gave me data I probably have to process yet. So I don't have any questions. I have essentially little or no experience in this area.
It's a lot of information to process in general, I think, and so yeah, definitely. If you have more questions later on, like if something later on comes up, you can call the hotline or you can email me. But thank you all for taking the time to listen to all of this, because it's really hard to process, and it's hard to hear, especially if it's like all presented to you at once in a bunch of slides. Our sexual assault presentations are usually about an hour and a half, and there's a lot of more information to be shared. But thank you for being open to all of it.
I was going to comment at some point that I was aware of a situation where a girl had been molested. It seems strong for the act, but it was by a relative. And when it came out, it kind of got swept under the carpet. No one would talk about it after that, and she found that pretty disturbing.
Yeah, in the atheist community, there have been some allegations that took a little longer to surface than maybe the people making the allegations would have liked to. It seems like a lot of times when a scene is like a boys' club, like be it like tech conferences or conferences full of atheists, which skews towards men, stuff like that ends up getting swept under the rug, even if it's just for the sake of PR for the organization or whatever. I think it's really important that that these things kind of get addressed within communities, especially communities where it's predominantly men, because the women in these spaces, like, they have every right to be there, and like everybody has something to contribute. And so, like, if you're gonna, it seems like a weird way to like look at it, but if you're gonna spend a bunch of money to go to a conference, you shouldn't have to think about like, am I going to be safe there because of my gender? And it seems like It seems like it just seems like over the last maybe 5 to 10 years in the atheist community, we've been struggling with this a little bit. And it's good. I think that this group had someone on to talk about it, and I think maybe more humanist communities and atheist groups should have this, have this information available, because it's not like we're immune to it, as a community. So.
Mm-hmm. That's the unfortunate part, is that no community is immune to it. Unfortunately, it happens in all kinds of communities, and when we're addressing these things, when allegations comes out and things like that, it's really hard to separate the personal and like the legal stuff and the emotional. It's just such a messy situation in general. But I think it's really important when talking about these things, and when we talk about the statistics, and it's like, the majority of perpetrators are men and things like that. A lot of men will kind of get defensive when that's brought up. And I really hope that anybody who hears any of our conversations knows that, that's not the approach that we're trying to take. We're trying to promote, everybody to be part of the solution, including men, because they are a huge part of the solution to this problem. And there are so many good men and folks out there who want to help and just don't know how. And there are a lot of people who may perpetuate this violence and not be aware of it, right? There's a lot of talk, especially when we're learning about consent. There's a lot of people that didn't know what consent was before, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I think I might have caused some harm previously. Or when we're talking about healthy and unhealthy relationships, some people all of a sudden realize, wow, I think I was somebody who was unhealthy. And that can be really hard to process, but it's important to acknowledge that and to work towards bettering yourself and learning from those mistakes, because everybody, if we're not aware, how are we going to know that what we're doing is wrong? And that's why the prevention is out there. That's why we're trying to bring awareness to everything, so people can be aware of how their actions are affecting other people.
I have a question from our Twitch chat. It may be a little bit outside of like what the YWCA does, but it may not. Somebody in my Twitch chat, again, Servant's a regular in here, asked about, I guess the best way I can summarize the question is like a balance between restorative justice and accountability. Is there, does YWCA work in restorative justice, or is that something that you're particularly interested in yourself?
I am particularly interested in restorative justice. As far as what the YWCA is, the first thing that comes to mind is our FOPP program. Our FOPP program is for first-time offenders, so people who have, bought sex from somebody and they were caught like in some sort of sting or something. Whatever the case, they are to receive criminal charges unless they go through our program. And in our program, if they're a first-time offender, they attend a presentation, they get a training on, what sexual assault is and all of this stuff. And I've heard that it's very mind-opening for a lot of people that attend the program. And in exchange for paying a fee and supporting, our other programs that help survivors, they then get the charge reduced, which is I think it's a huge break for a lot of people, but it's a great opportunity for folks to learn from their mistakes, and I think that's an example of restorative justice.
So there is some restorative justice program going on.
There's some.
My Twitch chat contains
and
very smart people
lots,
with smart questions, obviously.
I love it. It's great.
And I just real quick on that, you had mentioned somebody purchasing sex. Does YWCA have an official position on sex work?
So we serve survivors of human trafficking. Human trafficking is when somebody is taken against their will and manipulated into performing either labor work or sex work for the benefit of somebody else, right? In those situations of human trafficking, that person is not consenting to that situation, and that person is not in control of what they are, being forced to do. In terms of legal sex work, that is a completely different beast in terms of, what's happening there. There's a lot of intersection, unfortunately, and I think that's because of, the criminalization of sex work and things like that. The YWCA specifically doesn't have like a go-to stance on it, but we understand there's a lot of nuance to it, and there's a lot of intersection, and it's really important to take it person by person, I'd say.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I was going to elaborate a little bit on Scott's question, I guess, because that's somewhere where some of this talk, some of this stuff about believability comes into me, and I'm going to be off on a tangent now. When someone accuses a presidential candidate of sexual abuse after a very, very long time, it concerns me a lot, and I cannot believe them. My first thing is to say, I wonder what that's about. And so would you speak to that just generally? Maybe you have an opinion. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But it's getting really complicated now in some of these situations like this.
It is getting really complicated, and there are a lot of situations. There's a lot of examples, not just the president, but of people in power who have committed these crimes or are being accused of these crimes. And I think the way that we handle those situations are very different than the way we handle situations that involve, members of our community that are not in positions of power and members of our community that are, people of color or in the LGBT community. Unfortunately, the approach and response to sexual assault differs from community to community because of the culture that we have been raised in. And I think, I can't say whether or not the accusations towards him are true, but I can say that if they are, he needs to be held accountable whether or not he's president.
And on that, I think somebody I watch on YouTube, his name's Dusty Smith. He did a really good job of explaining the believe women. He didn't say, it doesn't mean that we should just take it as gospel when an accusation is made. It means that we should, as a society, or that law enforcement, or pick your organization or group of people, should look into it, investigate it, take a look at it, and look at it, dispassionately, without violence without bias to the extent that we can. It doesn't mean that every person who makes this claim is telling the truth. It means that when we say believe women, it means believe that there's a reason to investigate and a reason to look into it and a reason to figure out what's going on here. It doesn't just mean that this person is automatically telling the truth. And I think that if we think about it in that frame, it's a little bit easier to kind of understand the believe women talking point. It doesn't legitimately just mean believe everyone. It means be willing to investigate, be willing to take a look at it, be willing to be supportive, all of these kinds of things. It doesn't just mean, oh, this person's automatically telling the truth. And I think that maybe the little hashtag believe women is an oversimplification.
That's true. A hashtag of any of this stuff is an oversimplification.
Well, I would say that you have to weigh things. If you want to beat Trump, then believe somebody who wouldn't want to act on having to decide your vote by whether or not this woman is telling the truth. The state of the nation is at stake, and that's a little more important than just believing the first person who comes up with a claim. And there's always somebody who does. I shouldn't say that. But certainly people in power are targets for being denigrated. Because for all we know, the single Trump supporter will feel this would be helpful to their cause. And certainly we know that Trump does rely heavily on consulting people and going after them and asking foreign governments to help them. And he already asked Yugoslavia to investigate Biden a long time ago because they knew he was a threat.
Yeah, there was an article in the San Jose Mercury the other day that was saying, well, how do we balance Trump's stuff against this accusation at the present time anyway? Because if you remember, apparently he's always forgiven amongst his followers for him having done all these things he did, whereas a lot of other people who, of course, only accentuate their beliefs themselves think he should not even be president at all. And I have no idea how to measure that. how much of that is the same thing, same way I believe about the current situation, you know. Anyway, he was just saying that, gee, I wonder why it's acceptable for one but not for another among certain groups. Anyhow, I'm getting too political, so, because it's the only thing I know about, you know, it's the only area where it's been so repeatedly, because someone mentioned, what was his name, the judge, God, Kavanaugh, and all the stuff that went on around him, pro and con. Anyway, we've got a significant division in this country.
Well, go ahead, Al.
A problem. Also, it seems I'm coming to pushing language is no one I can look at who I really admire who doesn't have some character flaw, which I find kind of disturbing.
I believe that's true generically, yes. Everybody has feet of clay along one dimension or another. You know, this idea of celebrity always bothers me.
I hope it was clear to everybody that a lot of the stuff you said, you were talking about Trump, about Biden, as far as getting away with this and all that stuff.
I also think it's important that, like, when someone's a celebrity or a big public figure, it's like one incident, and like the totality of this stuff is that most of the people who are involved in this are not celebrities, and you've never heard their names. And so, like, the hyper focus on the famous people who are survivors and perpetrators, I think, is just maybe not the right direction for the car to be going generally. Because, like, your neighbor, one of your neighbors is a survivor of sexual assault. One of your neighbors is probably a perpetrator of sexual assault. And you, like, again, we're never, you know, we don't know these people's names. And I just think that it's a little more. I know how, you know, whatever. If somebody's famous, of course, the news is going to talk about them. But, you know, it might be more useful for people in their communities to focus on what's going on in their communities and how they can help folks in their communities versus worrying about two famous people who both have kind of similar kinds of accusations against them. I just think, like, as a general rule, it's better to maybe focus locally and not get so hung up on what the rich and famous are doing.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Megan.
That sounds like.
Oh, I was, yeah.
Like they say one is one person does one thing, another person does 50 things. You've got to balance them. They're the same. Everything is equal. That's not good reasoning.
Yeah, there was there used to be a really famous humanist who passed away several years ago, and he had an institute for getting the survivor and the perpetrator together. Is that thing still going? Who remembers it? Remember, it was a guy who used to attend all the time. I'm forgetting his name. Say it.
It was Hank Giretto.
Hank Giretto, the Giretto Institute. Are they still around, and have they? Do you connect with them at all, Megan?
I have not heard of that group specifically. I have heard of similar restorative justice practices that bring, you know, survivor and perpetrator together to have a conversation. And I think that's a wonderful thing if it works for both people, right? It's not going to work for every situation. But I think it's a wonderful alternative and could potentially minimize a lot of the barriers that survivors face when trying to go through the criminal court process and all of that.
Yeah, as I recall, he went to a couple of his meetings. As I recall, they didn't bring them together right away. They educated both sides for some period of time, and then they slowly involved them with each other. I mean, that was his process. He was a very humanistically oriented therapist who found this area very interesting because there was no work on it at all at the time he started. And it only works for a small percentage of people, for sure.
Right, and if you're not careful and thoughtful and slow, you can just re-traumatize the victim by putting them in contact with their assaulter. So good on the guy for the work he was doing, because it's probably very difficult and very, you know, sometimes you fail, and that's got to be like really disconcerting and really discouraging, because that's not, you know, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a mental health professional, but if I was going to go into that profession, I think that what you describe would be so fraught with risk that it would make me go like bonkers trying to process like what I was doing. So anybody trying to do that work, that's tough work, because there's like you got to walk that line, because you don't want to re-traumatize anybody. You don't want to give the perpetrator the opportunity to exert power over that person again by making them go to meetings with them or any, you know. So I definitely think there's probably good work to be done there, but man, that's probably very difficult. Very difficult.
Yeah, he had
The Duretto Institute, and it probably is not still going since he's been dead for a long time, and he had a high proportion of success, but he was a rare human.
Yeah, he actually, if I remember, the process included the entire family, because it is a family dynamic very often.
Yeah, from what I've read about these kinds of practices, I guess, are it's a lot of it is survivor centered. So they get to decide who of their family comes, or if, you know, the perpetrator's family is going to be there. And there's a lot of work done prior, right? There's a lot of individual therapy. There's a lot of prep work to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody is following the agreed upon guidelines during the discussion. Because you're right, David, otherwise there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of potential re-traumatization. But again, it could break down a lot of the barriers that people face when they're trying to go through the system, right? Some folks don't want criminal charges brought against this person because they have a unique relationship with them and they don't necessarily want to see them in jail. Or maybe they, you know, just want answers about what happened and they don't have enough evidence or memory of what happened to go through a criminal case. So having that option is huge.
I wanted to ask real quick, you had said that you deal with male survivors of assault too. If you could just talk a little bit about that, because some of what we do on our show, there are, we'll call them groups of men who try to weaponize the fact that men are also victims of assault, and like they claim there are no resources for men. I'm sure you may know the movement I'm talking about. And I just wonder, like, what does your organization, like, are the services like kind of one-to-one as the same as what's offered for female women, identified women people?
Yeah, so we offer the same services to everybody, no matter what they identify as, whether it be a woman, a man, you know, trans, non-binary, all of the above, right? And if someone identifies as a man, there's not, you know, a different set of services that we offer them or anything. They get the same access to everything, including our shelter. Our shelter is gender inclusive as well. And I think we do try to do a lot of work to destigmatize male survivors, because they are out there and they do call us and they do ask us for help, and they often have a lot of emotional grappling that's going on because, you know, there's a lot intermeshed there.
I want to just talk for a minute. Blair apparently had his hand up. You don't actually have to put your hand up anymore, Blair. You can just unmute yourself and go.
Okay. Well, thank you. I thought it would be easier to raise my hand and make it neater. But thank you. I had the woman just made a point about, people have their own ways to ask about, how to deal with, domestic violence issues and the like, and what exactly, how do you address bullying? And I know that I attend a lot of San Jose City Council meetings, and they're kind of at a quandary on what to do about next steps about that sort of issue. You try to nicely explain that it is, and it's an incredibly important point, that it is a matter of it's a judgment call, and we're allowing it to be a judgment call about how do you, I don't know if you prosecute or not, or if you ask for that kind of thing. But at the same token, at the same time, that is allowing and perpetrating, the continual spiral of violence, I think, in a way, and bullying too. And so I'm wondering, I mean, is there, you gave a nice introduction about, the people, we try to be, nice, and there's just a myriad of reasonings why we can't further ask people to stop hurting us. But how can you mention any other forms or techniques that can help that process, so people don't feel like, oh, I have to be cool and I have to protect my boyfriend kind of thing, or I have to protect my family situation? And if you have any advice about that, it's a difficult subject, and if you can talk about it all, I hope we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important that when we talk about people who harm and people who are harmed, it's important to remember that that's not all that they are, right? Survivors of violence are more than that. They have their own lives and, traits and qualities and all of these things. And so do perpetrators of violence. And I think the idea that someone who perpetrates violence is automatically a bad person, a villain, deserves to be locked away forever, that's not realistic, right? These people, whether they're aware that they cause that harm or not, they're still people, and they still, have lives and lots of other things going on. There are a lot of situations where someone who has perpetuated violence or been abusive was abused or harmed previously, right? And that's where they learned it. And situations like that, for example, are ones where, I think there's a certain amount of empathy that needs to be brought when, working with people who have perpetuated violence. It doesn't excuse what they did. It doesn't minimize the amount of harm that was caused and the amount of harm that individual person felt. But it doesn't also, completely demonize them. And I think that's a barrier that we face in this sort of like black and white thinking around violence. I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah. I mean, it's where I'm understanding it is it's important. There's ways to learn important skills in healing oneself, and that's important. Is that what you're kind of trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody has their own journey to healing, and we kind of have to unpack everything that we were taught before whatever happened, and we kind of have to reevaluate everything that we're responding to afterwards. But it's definitely an individual process, and it requires a lot of patience and empathy on all sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Because I know, the words that I spoke of it, I need to go through some of that healing myself still. And what I'm hearing from you is, it's how, when I go to these city council meetings, I guess I picked up the language of how can there be, they're totally empathetic too. They totally understand both sides of the issue, but yet within the city council, they talk about it in terms of how can there be action or results, and how can we know men or people aren't hurting other people anymore, and how can we be sure of that? They want a degree of safety and to feel assured that they're making progress with such things. And in being at the council meetings, I understand that it is what you said. It's a personal experience a lot, and I need to learn that personally myself, actually. So, yeah, I just wish, I'm kind of a victim of bullying myself. And I just, at this point in my learning, I just wish there was more resolution towards the bully, towards the bullies. And that I have to, be patient with that. And I am. And I hear what you're saying, and so I look forward to hopefully being able to talk with your group soon, and I need to connect with that. And I don't know what else to say about council issues, and just hope, I guess. I know that they're always working on things, and at the county level, they're working on things as well. And I guess that's about all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I appreciate it. Yeah, it can be very hard when, there's internal, individual, and then there's, in larger groups, and then we have policy and societal structures that can be limiting and difficult to manage.
I wonder if you could say something more about, I think you said you've got classes or something on what to do as a bystander when we witness something. And I always find it questionable whether I should get involved in something, or since I don't know the details, or just ignore it. It would be worth going and getting some kind of instruction on that.
Yeah, I could talk about that a little bit. So when we talk about being an active bystander, when we provide these trainings, the biggest thing that we encourage and emphasize is your own safety, right? We are not asking anybody to put themselves in danger to intervene. We're not asking anybody to put themselves at risk to help somebody else. But, we talk about different ways to safely intervene. We talk about partnering with people. There's power in numbers. Maybe you don't feel comfortable approaching somebody by yourself and talking about it, but maybe if you and your friends all go up and say, hey, we've noticed that you've been doing this thing and it's not cool. That's more in terms of youth that I work with, but there are lots of different ways to safely intervene in different situations. And I think if you aren't sure if the situation is safe or not, then, I would say refer to somebody else. Call our hotline, call local law enforcement, like a non-emergency line if it's not an emergency situation, and ask them for advice, because as professionals, they might be able to navigate the specific situation a little bit better. But I will say that being an active bystander, and intervening in situations of harm can look very different. And it could be as easy as going up to the person who you believe is in danger, either after whatever the thing is you saw, like maybe you see a fight happen between a couple and you notice that it's very aggressive, and maybe one of the partners is grabbing the other person's arm or something like that. And it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. Maybe it's not your place to jump into that argument and insert yourself, but maybe there's a moment where they step away from each other and you can go up to whoever was being grabbed and say, hey, I noticed that interaction seemed a little unsafe. Are you okay? Do you need me to call anybody for you or something like that? Or if you know the person who's causing the harm, you can say, hey, dude, I don't think what you did was very cool, right? We don't have to necessarily be up in their face about rape culture and sexual self-awareness and throw all these statistics at them, but we can say that, you seem to make that person uncomfortable, and I don't know if that was your intention, but that wasn't okay. Something as simple as that is being an active bystander.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see children being not assaulted or anything, but put down, The mother is sometimes rather uptight and feels she has to have everything look good, and she can be saying, I like to tell her, you have beautiful children, and whatever. So to say something to support the child, not that she, needs to. It's more, I like to reassure a child who's being put down that he's not alone.
Yeah, being a positive adult in a youth's life, in a child's life, is a huge, huge benefit to them, and could really make a difference in how they're coping with situations that might be difficult at home or something like that. So that's really great.
By the way, the slides you have will be available for us to put up online on our website?
Would it be best to send those to you, or who should I send those to?
Well, Matt, did you do the?
Yeah, you can send it to one of us, or if you can see the meetup people often like post it or post a link to the slides on in the like chat part of the meetup for everybody. Yeah. I have to figure out how to get it to like Dave so he can post it on his website.
Yeah.
David, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to email them to me, then I'll ask around and see if you can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll make sure you guys have resources and information to share and have for yourself.
Thank you.
Looks like we're out of questions and discussion.
If we were meeting, we'd be gathering around the lunch table and people naturally talk.
Yeah, this is usually our lunchtime.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm guessing there's no more discussion going on. If that's the case, we can end a little early.
I would like to express appreciation for our speaker and her wonderful attitude and everything. She seems to be able to really cope with any question. That's very impressive.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I noticed in your email you used your pronouns. Everyone is alive.
Yeah, that's something that we all do at the YWCA. We want to promote inclusivity, so we make sure to share our pronouns with everybody so that no one feels, that they're not being properly addressed or something like that. Yeah.
Good.
And it's also just a good thing to promote and teach people, because a lot of people don't know like what pronouns are. I'll ask students in a class that I teach, I'll be like, okay, everybody can go around, introduce yourself, say your first name and your pronouns. And everybody's kind of like, what do you mean? And I say, well, when someone talks about you, do you want them to say she or her or they? And then they're like, oh, wow, I never thought about that. But it's a great opportunity for learning and also to make sure that everybody feels included.